presenting live from the Delta Lounge at Detroit Airport after two failed attempts to go to Richmond, Virginia today. So later on this evening, I will be flying to Raleigh, North Carolina. So it's been a really long day here. I'm excited to present this content. Workforce readiness programming or training, or however you'd like to describe it, is a bit of a passion of mine. And I'm delighted to be sharing that with the world. And I hope that I inspire a couple of people today to consider where they might make their next hires and how they might be able to work with some people that are genuinely looking to work and just haven't got the opportunities that they might like at this point. Through some of their own bad choices and sometimes just through life happening, we all sometimes end up in places we wish that we hadn't been. I don't know how many people on the call today know me personally. I can see there's a few people. Mike, nice to see you. I've met Daryl a couple of times, and then there's a couple of people who've used their first names that I could guess who they might be, but thanks for joining me. And for those of you who don't know my background, I have been sober for 16 years now. When I was in my 20s, I partied pretty hard. I didn't make a lot of good choices. And by the time I was in my 30s, I very much needed to lay off the booze and didn't know how to. So I went to rehab, I went to outpatient counseling, and I went to a 12-step program, which I still attend today. So all of that led me along the path to where I am today, which is a business owner and a successful telemarketer. And without all those life experiences, I probably would not have ended up running Managed Sales Pros. Managed Sales Pros started when I was almost 40. I had just found out that I was pregnant, and not only was I pregnant, I was 22 weeks pregnant. I had just bought my first house. My husband had just gone to work for a nonprofit for about a quarter of what his consulting job had paid him. And we were kind of in this weird spot where we're like, well, what are we going to do now? There's not a lot of call for pregnant kickboxers. So I had to pivot pretty quickly. And I was like, well, I'm pretty good at cold calling. Maybe somebody would pay me to do that for them. So I just started calling local companies and asking them if they wanted someone to make their cold calls for them. And I kept doing that until somebody said yes. And then more people said yes. And when I had more people than I had time, I was lucky enough to be able to partner up with some really cool people, namely my sister, Tracy, who now runs the sales development team at Huntress, and my mother, who joined us after a couple of years in business to be our director of operations, and Ashley Battelle, who is now running mergers and acquisitions outbound for a company called Revenue Rocket. So we had an all-star cast at the beginning, and that team just keeps growing. One of the ways that we were able to become so successful was by keeping our recruiting, hiring, and training costs very, very low. So it takes us about 2 weeks to get an agent ready to call by themselves. And that includes throwing them on the phone in the first couple of days, because I don't want to invest a lot of time in anybody that is afraid of picking up the phone or who's just, phoning it in. See what I did there? I really want to make sure that people aren't just showing up for a paycheck. I mean, everybody has to work, and telemarketing is nobody's dream job. So that's the first thing you have to consider when you're hiring outbound agents, is that you don't really get the people that you want. You get the people that are prepared to do the job, and it becomes a great launch pad for any other role in your business. So if you could think for a moment about the people who are applying for telemarketing jobs, they really don't have a lot of other options available to them, or they'd be doing that. Right? At this point, we're competing with retail, and we're competing with quick service restaurants. We're competing with entry-level office administration roles. Outbound selling is difficult. It can often be stressful, and it can very much be boring on a pretty regular basis. So we don't always get the talent that we want. It's our job to find people who want to work and get them excited enough about the idea that of what their future could be like, so that they come into work every day, dial the phone every day, get really good at what they do, and then ideally either share that love with the people that come into the business after them, or move on to bigger and better things, which is what most of our agents have done. So for those of you who don't know, I sold my US based call center, Everywhere Managed, last September. And it wasn't the exit I wanted, but it was my first exit, and I'm proud of it. And at that time, I was able to place all of our outbound agents in roles that paid almost double what I paid them, and with significant health insurance. So it's a great launch pad role. So part of the challenge is getting people to think differently about that role, especially when they're used to hiring a very different way from a very different talent pool. When you're hiring techs, and I assume that most of the people on the call here today are technology business owners looking for ways to mitigate their expenses and grow their sales. So when you're looking at how you're going to hire a tech, they're going to need certain skills. Some of those skills you can give them, assuming that you have the time and ability to do so. And then you're going to have to hire some people who have more experience, who are going to be significantly higher paid assets, but who you won't have to babysit along the way so much. I mean, perfect world, we wouldn't have to babysit anyone that came into our business, but we all know that that just isn't so. So when you're bringing somebody in to do telemarketing, remembering that it's nobody's dream job is really important. You can ask them all the interview questions in the world, and especially in workforce readiness, they've been prepped and trained on how to interview properly. So they've been fed the answers. So the answers aren't that helpful. So first thing to remember is, when you're trying to hire for a job that nobody wants, you have to be a little less discerning than you would be normally. And it can be very disruptive to a business to bring in people who aren't what I would describe as career focused, right? When all you're worried about is, how am I going to pay rent? How am I going to put food on my kids' table? How am I going to pay my electricity bill? You'll take any job available to you, even if it is distasteful. So that is most of the candidate pool when it comes down to a telemarketing call center. Now, for a small business that isn't cranking out 120 calls per person per day, every day for forever, it's a different role, because you've got one or two people in a call center supported and surrounded by other people doing different things. There's more room for advancement. And ideally, if you get somebody that's coming in and is willing to grind the phone every day, shows up on time, does everything exactly the way that they're supposed to, and starts producing results for you, odds are you're going to help them come through your business and build them into a very valuable asset. And that's what I've seen happen time and again in our call center. We've hired people who have gone on to do some phenomenal things. We've produced 3 female CEOs already from the Everywhere Managed talent pool. We have a woman who is running a competitive call center to mine, and I outsource a significant amount of my work to her now. I mean, we trained her. We built her into the leader that we wanted in our business, and it just made sense that when she wanted to go out on her own, that we would support her in doing so. We've created sales development leaders. We've created business development managers. We've created field sales reps that have gone on to work for some of the largest vendors in our space. But no vendor would have looked at those resumes twice. They would have thrown them on a pile and moved on. So they joined us, and we were able to build them into a sales asset that a large vendor like Cisco, for example, would look at after spending several years with us. And that's the promise that we make to all of our team. If you could spend 2 years with us doing exactly what you're supposed to do, getting the results that you're supposed to get, we'll be able to champion you into any business in the channel that you would like to explore. Now, of course, there's going to be some challenges: prison records, drug charges, other offenses. If you've got very strict hiring processes, protocols, and background checks required, hiring from workforce training may be challenging for you. So one of the things I wanted to start with today, if you check the handouts section of the panels, you should be able to see there are some downloads available to you. One of them is an overview of a very common national job readiness program. And one of them is a couple of testimonials from agents that worked with us prior to moving on to different roles. And if you have a moment to take a look at them, the testimonials are actually pretty exciting for me anyway. And if you don't want to download them right now, I'm going to read them to you. So in 2016, I moved from North Carolina to Las Vegas, Nevada to start over. Before moving, I faced a near death experience and realized I needed to change. In August 2016, I met Carrie Simpson at a job fair that I was forced to go to by a counselor in my program. That day changed my life forever. I had my interview with Carrie, and in that interview, I made what I thought was a mistake that cost me the job. She asked, "How did you find the job fair?" And I answered without thinking, "My counselor made me go because of a program that I'm in." Carrie shared her story with me and hired me on the spot. I walked out without even asking what the pay was because I was so desperate to get a job, I would have scrubbed the floor if that's what it took. On August 22nd, 2016, I officially became an SDR. Little did I know that title would be the starting point in a career that I love. Today, I'm a fulfillment call center CEO, doing what I do best, helping companies grow. I also get the opportunity to pay it forward and find employees who need that one person to give them a chance, not based on their resume, not on their credentials, but on what they want their future to look like, just like Carrie did for me. Along the way, I have helped multiple people go from hopelessness to having a life beyond their dreams. Your next rock star could be a diamond in the rough. And that woman is Sierra Chase, who is now the CEO of Next Level Services. She is now running $1 million book of business. It took her a year to grow that $1 million book. So she went from 2016 being forced into workforce readiness from a counselor into being a CEO in under 5 years. And that's just indicative of one person that worked with us. We have so many stories like that. I'm going to share one more. And this is from Janaea, who is now a team lead at Next Level. She worked for several vendors before coming back to her original roots to work with Sierra again. I wanted to share a bit of my journey. Let me start by saying that I really needed a second chance. 2 years ago, I was working for a call center doing customer service. I showed up early every day and left late. I was doing my duties appropriately. I was tapped on my shoulder and let go because of my past. I am a felon. I was honest about my past. I didn't hide it, and the company had no choice but to let me go due to their policies. I was devastated, and I went to Job Connect. I applied for an SDR position. I went to the interview. I was introduced to a woman by the name of Sierra, who gave her testimonial before this. Feeling awkward and not very confident because of my experience since I had been looking for employment, I sat down for my interview. Sierra gave me my second chance. I was determined to give her 110% to show her that I deserved that second chance. I've been with the company for 2 years. It has been a proud time in my life to know if you want to change bad enough, you have to put in the work. Company pride starts with the pride of the employees working for that company. I wanted to see the company grow and prosper because I knew they would treat me no different and help me with my personal and business goals. I reached a goal this month personally and in business that I've been striving to achieve for months. I am proud to be a part of this team. The title SDR has changed my life. I am grateful for being given a second chance. So as we're moving forward, I just want you to think like there are so many people out there like that who, messed up a little bit when they were kids or, even when they were adults. And, we have to allow some grace for change. Now, for every, one Sierra, we probably have 9 people who are just looking for a paycheck. So there is a fine line between finding that diamond in the rough and being taken advantage of by people who really know how to work the system. And we struggled through all kinds of iterations of our workforce readiness on the job training program before we found the right fit that allowed us to balance our HR requirements, our budget, and, an amount of empathy that didn't extend into allowing people to roll over us constantly. So I hope that through the webinar today, you learned some of the things that we did, and maybe I can save you a couple of the painful moments that I went through. Like I can't even count the number of apartments that I paid for. 2 of those people never came back to work again. So there are some things that I would still do to this date. Like we had somebody who was working for us who was homeless. We didn't know it at the time. We began to suspect that there was an issue because she didn't smell very good. And we first offered to let her use the washer and dryer that I had installed at our office because she wasn't the only person that couldn't afford to have a washer and dryer in their home. So we found out through that she had been living in her car. She'd been living in her car for maybe a quarter. She had been parking in the parking lot behind our office. Nobody knew. She got up in the morning. She came to work every day. She never told anybody. I had no problem paying for her apartment, and I'm very proud of the person that she has become today. So when you're starting out with workforce readiness programming, it's really important to do a little bit of research. There's a lot of programs out there. Some of them can be very overwhelming. Some of them are overly complex, and they're all government mandated. So there is a lot of paperwork involved. The best place that we found was a company called Job Connect, and it's a government mandated program. The link up here on the screen right now, which is hidden by my camera, so just hold on for a second. Move. Well, you can see the link up there, and I can't. But you want to check out American Job Centers. You want to take a look at that website, enter your zip code, and it'll show you the workforce training programs and the contacts of the people that facilitate those programs. Now, this website is made for employees or potential employees to go and explore their options. But anybody listed on that website is going to be able to point you in the direction of a workforce training program that'll be appropriate for what you're looking for. Not everybody is going to be a suitable candidate. Thanks, John. Nice to see you again. I always appreciate seeing you on the webinars. So John posted that into the chat window. It is careeronestop.org. So if you contact the people that are listed on that website, ask them who you need to speak to about grants for on-the-job training. Now, there's multiple types of on-the-job training, and we're going to get to that next. But you want to make sure that you're going to qualify and that you have all the pieces ready in order for you to begin hiring out of those programs. And the pieces are, some of them are very simple. Like you have to be an actual company. You have to have office space. You have to be paying a minimum amount. The role has to have a minimum number of hours. Some of the programs require you to offer health insurance. Some of them don't. So there's a lot of research to do to find the program that's going to be most appropriate for you. But most programs that we discovered pay for between 10 to 16 hours of on-the-job training. And there's different tiers of on-the-job training. So there are programs where you can create a training program that you can then partner with that government agency to have people come through your business. So we had a small 10-seat call center that was nothing but people coming through the call center, and they would never come into our call center afterwards. We created a training program where the company that we partnered with could place agents that needed to learn how to do the job in this training program. That was the least successful of all of our on-the-job training engagements. It was very difficult for us to manage. We didn't have a lot of control over who came in or what they were required to do when they got there. It was mostly an educational, like, hey, you want to be a telemarketer? Great, here, we'll teach you how. And then they'd get a little certificate and they'd be able to take that back to their program and ideally become more employable. So that was a more altruistic approach to on-the-job training. My favorite type of on-the-job training is the part where it's very win-win. Somebody gets a job, I lower my costs, I increase my margins, everybody's happy. The programs will vary wildly from state to state. So just for clarity, our call center was in Nevada, and the programs that we engaged with were also in Nevada. So that is the state that I have the most experience with. The research that I did up to this webinar indicates that that program is very similar from state to state. It may have a different name. In Nevada, it's called Nevada Works, and the subsection of that program that we worked with is called Job Connect. We had our own contact at Job Connect after we started working with them, and that person helped us facilitate job fairs. They helped us write job descriptions. They helped us come in and do little seminars on just what people would need to get ready to work for us. So I don't mind teaching someone how to make cold calls, but I don't want to teach people how to use Excel. I don't want to teach them how to become, entry-level computer literate. That will burn a lot of your time. So especially as IT companies, we need to have people who are already literate enough that they can figure out how to work email and they can use a basic cloud-based CRM. We're a Zoho shop. I don't have any preference to the one that you're using, but the simpler, the better. And the more process oriented your sales structure is, the better you will succeed with people who have maybe been out of the job force for a little while and aren't as savvy as they need to be. So there are 3 different options in Nevada that we explored. There's employer-based training, which is the first program I talked about, where we created a program that the Workforce Readiness Training Center could send people to. We got compensated for that, but in my opinion, we didn't get compensated well enough to justify the disruption to our business. We actually had to set up a completely different call center, which was all right. We had lots of space, so those trainees didn't engage with the rest of our employees. They stayed in their call center and everybody else worked in the other one. We never had one single person graduate from that program and then move into on-the-job training. On-the-job training, a fantastic program. This is the one that I like the best. This is a program where the state reimburses you for somewhere between 10 and 16 weeks of your agent's salary. Now, this is applicable across all different areas. So you don't just have to hire a sales rep, for example. But since I train sales and marketing reps, that's what we're talking about today. And it takes us about 2 weeks to get a caller from, I've never made a phone call before, and maybe I had a retail job at one point, but I'm terrified of the phone, and I just got out of jail and I haven't touched a computer in 5 years. Right? It takes us about 2 weeks to get that person completely functional and literate in our processes and the scripts that we use and the things that we do. So we can have that person generating revenue for us in 2 weeks. And the state is reimbursing us for up to 16 weeks of their salary. So the great thing about that, in my opinion, is that 16 weeks is a perfect amount of time to see if they're going to be a good fit for your organization or not. If you haven't figured out whether or not they belong there between 12 and 16 weeks, then there's some strategic planning that you should be considering versus engaging with more sales and marketing talent at that point. That 16-week period allows you to have a really good test run. And if they're already producing revenue by the 3rd week, even if they leave before week 16, you've kind of broken even on that. Now, there's obviously some opportunity cost you need to think about. You can't just expect them to manage themselves, train themselves. So one of the things you're going to have to think about is, how much of my time do I have available to spend with these new hires? Another thing to consider is that for every 1 agent that works out, you're going to have 3 that don't. So you have to hire more people than you're likely prepared to do so at this time. And then if you've got 4 people, you're going to need 1 person to manage them. Ultimately, when you hire those 4 people, you're going to lose 1 in training in the first 2 weeks. You're going to lose 1 in the first 30 days. You're going to lose 1 before day 90. And the one that sticks, that's the person that you're going to have mentor and deal with all of the other callers that you bring in through that program afterwards. So that 4-to-1 ratio, that's consistent whether we're hiring out of Workforce Readiness or whether we post an ad on Indeed. We're going to hire 4 agents. 1 of them is going to work out. Incentive-based employment, we didn't explore very often. It was very complicated, and you didn't get paid until they had worked for you for a full year. So you were incentivized to keep them afterwards. So the agents that did stay longer than a year from on-the-job training, we could roll into that program. However, we preferred to keep most of our money in the on-the-job training area. It was easier to apply for. The paperwork was much less stringent than the incentive-based employment programming. And there is a downloadable handout that talks about the different programs in the webinar today. So if you go to the handout section, you can download it, read through it, figure out which ones you'd like to explore for yourself. And these are all, again, they're state programs, so they vary a little bit from state to state. But ultimately, here is the help that you will get when you start working with a state-sponsored workforce readiness training program. Curated job fairs. I cannot tell you how much time and money we spent going to like shitty casinos in Las Vegas to weirdly attended job fairs. We did meet Sierra at one of those job fairs. And one of the nice things about going to anything like that is that if they are receiving any sort of government subsidy at all, so if they are on food stamps, if they are on social assistance of any kind, or they're receiving unemployment benefits, or any other family focused program, they are eligible, or you are eligible to be reimbursed for their training, whether you found them through that Nevada Job Connect program or not. If you filled all the paperwork and you are in partnership with that group, if somebody applies outside of that program, you still can apply for subsidy for them. So that was not something that we knew at the time. We didn't figure that out until we got more deeply engaged with a regular what's the word I'm looking for? Dedicated. We had a dedicated counselor that worked with us that helped us find the right people, interview the right people. So one of the great things about this is if you think about what your HR overhead looks like right now and what it would look like if you had to go and try and hire 4 people right now, the amount it would cost you to post jobs online, the amount of time it would take you to vet resumes, the amount of time it would take you to interview, the HR payroll on something like that becomes, bigger and bigger and bigger, especially as you have to replace that revolving door of agents leaving. So if you can have a program like Job Connect doing it for you, not only are you saving money on the revenue that you will be, on the salaries that you would have been spending on those agents, you're also getting a de facto HR manager who is helping you build your business at no cost to you. And for us, that was invaluable. I cannot tell you the amount of hours that we spent reading resumes. So during the pandemic, of course, we've all had challenges with staffing. We've all heard about this huge labor shortage. When it wasn't like that, we would get thousands of people applying for jobs every month. Anytime we ran an ad, thousands of jobs. And the challenge, I think, with unemployment benefits is that you have to demonstrate that you're looking for work, but you don't have to take a job. You just have to demonstrate that you're looking for work. So there's a lot of people just churning through job ads to demonstrate that they're looking for work so that they can keep their unemployment benefits. And a company like ours, we're going to experience that over and over and over again. And it was super frustrating because we would spend hours going through resumes. If we got 1,000 of them, maybe we narrowed that down to 100, and that would take hours. Then we take that 100 and we narrowed that down to the pool of how many ever we were going to interview. And then when we would reach out to those people, we either wouldn't get responses back, or they would respond and no-show for their interview, or they'd come to their interview, they'd no-show on day one. It was extraordinarily frustrating, and it was a huge time suck. And we were a small enough business back then that it was still, leadership of the company that was hand-picking resumes to interview. So that was one of the things we got to stop doing, and it freed up an extraordinary amount of leadership time. So thinking on opportunity cost, what are you doing right now that somebody else might be able to do for you? That's one of the great things about working with a job counselor. And in this case, our person was fantastic. They would set up our own fairs. They would invite us to larger group fairs. And then they would take point on vetting out anybody that we didn't want. So we had some restrictions around the offenses, for example. So we were comfortable hiring people who had prison records, but we weren't comfortable hiring people who had sexual offenses in their past, for example. We didn't want to deal with that, and we were able to say, like, hey, that's a hard no for us if they have this kind of record, or if it was a violent criminal offense. We're not interested in that. Like, we were pretty flexible around drug offenses. It's a call center, so if we're going to screen for drugs, we're not going to have many employees left at the end of that. So, especially with marijuana becoming legal now, we had to change our policies, our handbooks, our everything to accommodate the fact that it was no longer an offense to smoke weed in Nevada. So we couldn't put that on we couldn't require drug testing, for example, that tested for that, even though you might be able to for other government roles and for roles where maybe you've got a DoD contract, or, it's all a personal preference. If you are very opposed to the idea of your team using drugs, you may want to say to your work placement team, hey, we require a drug test. Anybody you place with us is going to have to pass a drug test. And the nice thing about that is they will do that for you prior to putting them forward for an interview. And you don't just have to take anybody they send your way. You get to interview them exactly the same way as you would any other candidate. You get free job board postings. So even if you're not going to hire through Nevada or Job Connect or whatever your local state program is, you're still getting a lot of exposure online when people are looking for jobs, and there's no charge to use the state sponsored job boards. They'll give you space to interview candidates. So if you're running your business remotely right now, they will give you a boardroom where you can conduct interviews all day. They'll bring the candidates in, they'll schedule the interviews. You don't have to do any of it. That was glorious. And again, you'll have up to 16 weeks of reimbursement for any candidate that's using any state social programming. So some of the common mistakes, and I mean, we made a ton of these, so I just thought I'd try and save you some of the grief. So the first one, not reading the fine print. And I'm just going to like sneak ahead one slide because I know that people look at this and they like freak out a bit, but this is that overview of one of the state sponsored programs. This is just the table of contents. So if you can imagine what things are hidden in there that you need to understand before you start signing documents, it's really important that you have someone review that. So if you're not a details guy or gal, I would have your lawyer peruse the agreement before you sign off on it, and just make sure that you qualify for everything that's on there, because if it turns out that you missed something and you now sign a government document where they're giving you money and it turned out that you actually didn't qualify for the program, you're going to have some problems later. So make sure that you qualify for the program that you're applying for. And if that's not the right program, call those people back and help them, let them help you find another one. There are dozens out there. Not clearly defining the job. So we know some other call centers, and they advertise on Craigslist, they advertise on Indeed and Monster and all the big job boards, but they kind of obscure the fact that it's a telemarketing job. People don't want to be telemarketers, so they're a little dodgy around describing what the role is. And somebody comes in and interviews and then finds out that it's a telemarketing job. They never wanted a telemarketing job. And, you know, they still have options. There's still lots of people looking for people to work, so they don't have to come be telemarketers. It wasted a lot of time. So be very forthcoming with what you want from your new employee. What does their day-to-day look like? How many calls do they have to make? How are they held accountable? What's their benchmark? How do they make more money? Be super clear on those job descriptions so that when your job counselor is sitting down with potential candidates, they can review that step by step with them and say, are you sure this is a job that you would be comfortable with? Right? You don't want to invest time for candidates to leave, even though they're being paid for. You still have to take time out of your day to deal with that. So you're the most expensive asset in your business. If you're the business owner, interviewing people that never wanted the job to begin with isn't a good investment in your time. Taking too long to hire. Now, we all hear the hire slow, fire fast adage, but in a labor shortage like this, you don't have that luxury. And for telemarketing, if you don't hire them after the interview, they're just going to go get another telemarketing job somewhere else. There is a finite talent pool for telemarketing, same as there is for everything else. So if somebody wants to work, give them the chance to work, especially if there's no financial risk to you. If you're going to train 3 people, train 6 people. If their comp is covered anyway, you're going to get at least 10 weeks of outbound work out of them. And you're not obligated to keep anybody that isn't performing up to the standards that you've identified are important to you. And again, your job counselor will know that as well. So there is no mandate for you to keep people that aren't working out, or who aren't a good culture fit, or who are disruptive in your business, or who don't come to work on time. Individual interviews we got rid of years ago. And reading resumes, I don't read a resume now until somebody walks into the office with it in their hand. And that's something that we state: bring in a copy of your resume. I don't care if you already filled out the form online. We clearly have stated bring your resume to your interview, because we're not reading them. Anybody that applies for a job gets an automatic, like an autoresponder inviting them to a group interview. We do 2 group interviews a week. We do one on a Tuesday morning and we do one on a Thursday afternoon. There's a structure to them. There's a process to them. We follow it to the letter. And that way we aren't spending all that time reading those thousands of resumes that come in. Right? That would bury us. We'd have to hire 2 additional HR people to continue to vet that quantity of resume. And even after the job counselors are vetting people, we'll still get people who'll no show. So there isn't really any point in reading the resume until somebody's sitting right there in front of you. I'm telling you, most of the time, unless they are unable to enunciate well, or their spelling is so horrific as to be unintelligible. Unintelligible? Is that the right word? Unintelligible? Anyway, if they can't spell and they can't speak, then we can't hire them. If they can follow a process, it's money in the bank. You just have to have the process so dialed in that anyone could follow it. And standard operating procedures are something that Tracy demanded we live or die by. John, I'm sure that you can vouch for that. She got us all, everything got standardized, and if you could go step by step through a process, you could absolutely succeed at being a telemarketer with us. And by succeeding, I mean you could go from your $12 to $15 an hour base salary to a $55,000 a year job very quickly. Like ultimately, in 2 quarters, if people weren't generating double their base salary, they didn't stick around. So our goal was to get people performing. We wanted 85% of our team to be performing to at least 100% or higher of their plan. And that led to some high performing agents making some life-changing money. Like if you haven't worked in 6 months and you come in, it's a long time between paychecks from that first check to the third one. And then before you know it, you're 6 months in, and people were coming in and they had their hair done for the first time in years. And they came in with like nice nails and new clothes and a Starbucks Frappuccino that they couldn't have afforded 3 months earlier. It's really a joy watching people buy their first homes, buy their first car, get out of debt, learn how to manage their money properly. Like it's a place where people either hated it and left immediately, or they really kind of understood our core values and they got super engaged and they really wanted to work towards goals that helped them change their lives. And one of my first jobs way back in the day was selling vacuum cleaners door to door. The best sales training I ever had was selling Filter Queen vacuum cleaners in the middle of winter in Winnipeg, Canada, going door to door, just knocking on people's doors, vacuuming their carpets and trying to sell them a vacuum cleaner. And I tried to take a lot of what I learned when I was 19 and kind of like desperate just to find my place in the world and pivot that into how we try to motivate and inspire the people to come and work with us. I'm great. Thank you. Bias in your hiring process is going to kill you at this point, right? So if you're going to start interviewing people who maybe have a different life experience than you need to start finding ways where you can interview where you're not letting your bias get in the way, right? If you are anti-drug, and you're sitting in front of somebody who did a little time for like marijuana possession and you know that it's going to cloud your judgment, you're going to want to change how you interview. And you're going to want to change the questions that you ask. I don't ask anybody what they did time for. If I know they have a record, they'll tell me that through Job Connect. I don't ask them what it's for. Job Connect knows what's acceptable to me and what isn't. So I'm assuming they're not moving anyone into a job with us that isn't within the guardrails that is okay for me and my business. And there's not very many offenses that I'm not okay with. I think that people deserve second chances, and there's nothing to steal. There's no like, yeah, I guess they could sound shitty on the phone, but nobody's walking out with all of our computers at the end of the night, and there's no money on site, and really, we got insurance to cover everything. So we were concerned about violence in the call center. We were worried about people who might have weapons, who were bringing them into the call center and might not be stable. So those were the things that we worried about, not like minor theft and somebody kiting checks and somebody selling drugs. It's telemarketing. It is not rocket science. So not having a documented sales process will hurt you. It'll hurt you no matter who you're hiring. If you're bringing sales reps in, putting them in a corner and expecting them to perform, you're going to struggle to build a high-performing sales team. They are not sales leaders. They are sales agents, and they need instruction and accountability and continuing education. And until you have that process clearly defined, standardized, and set out so that there are no exceptions and there are no variations, you will struggle with telemarketers until you've got that button down tight. And when you've got it buttoned down, it's super simple because it never changes. Again, a structured training program. What do you do in those 2 weeks? You're going to have to demonstrate to the workforce readiness programming agents that You have a training program that works, and you can create education and meaning in a program that's going to allow people to move on to bigger and better things at some point, right? Nobody wants to be a telemarketer forever. There's a stepping stone into another job. Can you clearly demonstrate what people are going to learn, how they're going to learn it, and how that's going to benefit them? Because that's going to sway who they're sending people to. So, will they send people your way? Absolutely. Are they going to send the best candidates your way? No, they want those candidates to thrive in an environment where they're going to be supported. So, being able to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about and that you've got a very structured, organized, disciplined place for people to come to work, super important. Remember, if you're hiring people who've just gotten out of jail or who maybe are coming out of a rehabilitation facility, they have lived very structured lives for the last few years. They made their bed at the same time every day. They had breakfast at the same time every day. They had the same chores every week. They had to go to this place at this time. They had to go to this therapy appointment. They probably had to go piss test, and then they probably had to go see their parole officer, right? They've lived very structured lives. Coming into an environment where it's just like, yeah, do whatever you want. Yeah, clock in whenever, do whatever, right? That's not going to work for them. It's actually going to be counterproductive to give them all of that freedom when they've been so restricted in what they are and are not allowed to do. They are used to following instructions and taking leadership at that point. And the people that are truly looking to excel are looking for someone to guide them, right? Imagine people that are so willing to come to work that they will take a telemarketing job, even if they were like, we got people who had been, high powered executives in previous roles and, did a little too much cocaine, did a little time for possession of that cocaine, and now they got to start over at the bottom again. It's very humbling to come into an organization and pretend that you don't know anything. And these people are really kind of put in a position where it doesn't matter what they did before, they're being judged by this one thing that happened to them. So if you can overlook that one thing, bring them in, but you have to treat them just like anyone else, whether they ran a hedge fund before or whether they flipped burgers before. Now they're here. So I've always felt like, well, this is the job you applied for. This is the job that you're doing. And until you've demonstrated that you can do this job, we're not going to give you a chance anywhere else. But we have people who are team leads now, CEOs, directors of business development for some of the larger vendors in the channel. People have moved on to do other cool stuff. I'm really proud of all of them. And again, for those 10 people, we probably hired 100 people in 2019, and we are a 30-person company. So churn was inevitable and completely manageable when your process is identical from person to person to person. A training agreement. So when somebody comes to work for us, it's at will employment in Nevada, but we also had a training agreement, and essentially that training agreement said that if you are late or if you're late or absent at any time within the first 2 weeks of us hiring you, you're fired. Don't come back to work. And we went back on that a couple of times, and every time we did, it bit us in the butt. There was one person that we did allow to keep his job. His car broke down on the freeway. He called us and he walked into the office. It took him an hour and a half, but he still came into work. And one of the other people on our call center floor gave him a ride home and then picked him up every day for the next week and a half so that he could get to work on time while his car was being repaired. And that's the culture that we built at our business. So that training agreement is essential. What do you expect from people? And helping them plan and prepare for what working looks like is really important too. If you haven't had to go to work, maybe you haven't taken the bus to work every day for the last little while. Maybe you don't understand that the bus only runs every 45 minutes and you think that you can just go stand out in front of your house and the bus will show up and it'll get you to work on time. So one of the things that you can do to help prepare your new team members for success is teach them how to get to work. Give them a free bus pass. Food insecurity is huge if someone hasn't worked for a while. Make sure you've got like Pop-Tarts and cereal. And I think we always had bagels. We always had peanut butter. We always had fresh fruit and like basic lunch items. So nobody was ever going to miss meals. We didn't want people choosing whether they had to send their kids to school with lunch or whether they were going to eat lunch. So we also had a food pantry that people contributed to. So no judgment. We tucked it away in the back corner of the office, and you need a couple cans of soup or some craft dinner, or you're not quite to payday yet. No problem, right? We didn't want anybody that was coming to work for us every day to ever go without anything. We also did a lot of cash bonuses. especially in that first, if they joined at the end of a pay period, maybe there was a 3-week period where they were going to get paid. We wanted to make sure that they'd have groceries. So we had grocery cards and Starbucks cards and all kinds of things where we could have little contests that weren't that meaningful, but it wasn't like a handout. People actually achieved a goal, received a reward, but it was a reward that would be helpful to them. If you need diapers, getting a lunch out with your boss isn't that great of a reward. So we tried to think of things that would be valuable to everyone. And then we often saw people like winning an award and then sneaking it to the person next to them because they knew that the person next to them had 3 kids and they didn't have kids. Like it was a phenomenal environment to work in after a couple of years of working with people who just needed a little bit of help getting to the place that their peers were. Now, as a business that isn't 100% callers, right? Our whole business is call center. Our whole business is nothing but agents. Your business is not, and you're going to need to consider what the impact of that revolving door role might have on your business. So churn is going to be inevitable. There's going to be turnover. There are going to be people with weird personal problems and all kinds of nonsense that aren't necessarily used to coming to an environment where maybe you have to wear a suit to work every day, or maybe there are some very specific requirements that you have of your team. These people are going to come into your business and they're going to have to interact with people who have lived different lives than them. You've got engineers and college graduates and business owners and, like who knows where you came from, but it's probably not the exact same spot as this person. So preparing your team for what it looks like when you partner with workforce training is really important. It's going to be a big shock to your business at the beginning, especially if you're not used to people just getting up, going for lunch and never coming back, because that happens a lot. Not having enough empathy, I think it's very important in the first 2 weeks to not put up with any shit, right? The best anyone's ever going to be is in the first 2 weeks of their employment. So if they can't get to work on time in the first 2 weeks of their employment, they're just an HR nightmare waiting to happen, and you got to cut them loose, right? If they can get through the structure and the habit forming of the first month of their employment, they're probably going to be okay. But if you don't help them, right? Like sitting down with someone and just explaining to them how to take the bus. Like, here's your house, here's the office. Here are the 3 different bus routes that get from your house to the office. Here is a bus pass. Like we've had people who, like, we've paid for their Ubers to come in when they haven't been able to get to work on time from time to time, because we learned that they had to take their kids to a daycare that was 45 minutes away from their house. So like, as we adjusted and learned, we learned about what we needed to ask after the hiring process. You can't ask people if they have kids before you hire them. That's not legal. But after they've been hired, then we can work with them to help them figure out, like, okay, here's how you got to plan your day. We know that you need to be at work by 7:30 a.m. And we know that your school starts at 7 a.m. So you've got to get to school by 7, and then you've got to be at the office by 7:30. How are we going to help you do that? And then we ask them to come up with a plan, and we review it with them. And just little things like that. Empathy goes a long way to having very loyal employees. Too much empathy, and you just end up paying for people's apartments, and they never come back to work. So there's a good balance there of wanting to help people, but not wanting to help people to the extent that it damages your business or your peace of mind. So the cheat codes here: don't read resumes. Don't read individual resumes for this role. If they show up, you read the resume, and if they don't, well, then you didn't waste your time reading the resume. Group interviews with basic skill testing. So we do a couple of tests since we schedule for so many types of businesses and so many time zones. Most of the time, what we lose an appointment on will be some sort of error around scheduling. The time zones are wrong or the rep is wrong. So we don't necessarily want people multitasking aggressively, but we need to understand, can you convert 9 a.m. Pacific into 9 a.m. Eastern and vice versa? So we have a time zone test. We have a basic spelling and grammar test. We don't penalize people too aggressively on that one. We don't weight it as much as we weight just like basic problem solving. We do a typing test because we want people typing into the CRM. We don't want them writing notes on a piece of paper and then taking 20 minutes in between calls to type their stuff into the CRM, because then they're only going to make 40 calls a day, and we need them to make 120. So we need to find efficiencies, and that's one of the ways that we found it, is we had to stop hiring people who couldn't type. So whatever it is that you need to be successful, those are the things that you want to test for. Like what you did for a living before you became a telemarketer doesn't really matter to me. Can you type? Can you spell? Do you sound good on the phone? And one of the other things that was, and you guys will all probably appreciate this, our MSP hated us. Can you imagine what it was like to enable and then disable over 100 employees in 1 year, often within 4 or 5 days of each other? So there was a constant like, hey, turn this on, hey, turn this off, hey, turn this on, hey, turn this off. And no matter how many times we explained that to our outsourced accounting firm and our outsourced MSP, they were still always like, we weren't expecting this. I'm like, well, I told you that we had 40% turnover every year. What did you expect it was going to look like? So the way that we solved that was by getting 10 fully set up workstations that we used for training. Agent 1, Agent 2, Agent 3. So as long as we weren't hiring more than 10 people at a time, we were always good. So we didn't have to requisition software licenses and then, turn it on, get Carrie at managedsalespros.com and then turn it off, and then then we hire the next person, turn it off, turn it on. So that's something you may want to consider. Don't get all set up for somebody who's not going to stay for longer than 3 or 4 days. So once you've got the people in place that you need, maybe you don't need so many extras, but it never hurts to have a spare functional systems set up around our office. That also eliminated the need for managed services for us, by the way. So when we got to the point where we were like, hey, 10 extra computers set up costs us very little every month. We pay for our software licensing, but if something breaks, we're just going to move Joe over to that computer, and then we're going to throw that Omniplex or whatever that little Dell thing is in the garbage. We're going to buy another one. We're not going to bother fixing our call center computers anymore. So it eliminated some spend for us as well. Our executive team all had managed contracts, but the call center floor no longer required one. So we were able to eliminate a little bit of overhead working with our MSP to find a solution that didn't make them pull their hair out every time we called them on, hiring fair day. And exceptions will kill you here. So you can't let stuff slide, right? If somebody violates something that's important to your business, you're going to have to, unfortunately, release them back to industry. Every time you make an exception, you're going to have problems. So, again, this is that fine print thing that we talked about before. Every one of these sections has even more sections just like it. So it can be a little bit daunting. I would say skip this at the beginning, go right to that website, call people that are in your area and have them walk you through the programs. So instead of doing all the legwork yourself, just call Job Connect or whatever the program is called in your state and have them tell you what you should be doing and which program is going to be suitable for you based on what you need and how many people you want to hire. There's always restrictions around has to be full-time employment. You have to be paying them at least, I think for us, it was at least $10 an hour, but our base was like 12 to 15. So we were fine there. Some of those programs require you to offer your employees benefits. Some of them don't. So just allow the job counselor to tell you what programs are going to be most beneficial to you, and you don't have to do all the legwork yourself. Here is an example of the job description that we submitted to the workforce training program. This was for a combination role. We needed someone to do about 20 hours of administrative work, and we still wanted them to do 20 hours of calling. There's not one person in our call center, with the exception of my mother, that cannot get on the phone, myself included, company president included. Somebody calls out sick, there are days when I am still dialing the phone, and I don't mind doing it because I like to show them that I still got it. So very organized, very specific. Here's what we expect from you. This many calls every day. That's one of the things that people still find difficulty wrapping their heads around. Unbiased interview scoring. So one of the things that we tried to do, because before we started letting Job Connect just do our interviewing for us, we had 4 or 5 people that would help us out on job fair day. So like 40 people would come in to take tests and do interviews. And I didn't have time to interview 40 people for an hour. So I recruited the help of our call team, and we had a very structured, unbiased 1 to 5, no real, I guess some of them are a little nebulous. Like, were they dressed professionally? Well, what's your version of professional? Right? Like just basic things. And so long as the candidate scored above a certain score, we considered them hireable, and then we would move forward in the process with them. And if they were under like 65% or under 65 or whatever the final score was, we didn't move them forward in the process, right? Simply because we knew based on previous experience that those candidates were not going to work out for us. The training agreement, this is the one that we used, and this is, except for the signature part, this is pretty much what we made people sign, acknowledging that if they were late or absent at any time during training, that they were fired immediately. Probably easier in an at-will state, but I'm sure that there are probationary periods in other states as well, where you could itemize what exactly people had to do at each step in the process to retain their job. So how can Managed Sales Pros help you with your programming? Well, if you're interested in pursuing workforce training placement programming, I would encourage you first to reach out to the state body that is governing that where you live. And if you're ready to move forward, you can look at working with us to build your sales playbook so that you've got a very structured sales process for people to follow. We can train those people for you. We can train you, so we can do train the trainer, and we can also execute for you and help you manage those people. So if you do not want to manage your new callers, we can help you do that as well. We have a little bit of time. I talked a lot today. We've got a little bit of time for Q&A now. If you've got some questions, I would be delighted to answer them. And thanks to those of you who stuck it out all the way to the end. What, John? No questions? Well, I'm going to stick it out until the very bitter end. So I don't believe I have private questions enabled. You have to ask them publicly. So if you'd like to ask a question and you don't want to ask it publicly, my email address is right there, and you're welcome to send me a note afterwards. We have a couple of offers. Ooh, I've never used this before. Let's see, how does it work? Super fun. All right, well, you've got 3 more minutes, so speak now or forever hold your peace, and then I'm going to have to go eat all of the brownies in the Delta Lounge. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for joining me today. I really appreciated your time and attention. Thank you, Mike. I expect that I will be in Raleigh with Tracy. I'm presenting at a Huntress event tomorrow and the day after that as well. So thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure, and I will see you hopefully next Tuesday. Our next webinar is Should You Start a Podcast? So I hope I'll see you then. You can register for it on our website. Have a great evening.